Welcome to Sound Off Extra. I am the Solomonster here on the official YouTube channel for the Solomonster Sounds Off wrestling podcast, which is posted each and every Sunday exclusively on the Solomonster.com, Stitcher Radio, and in iTunes. And on this particular episode, we are going to have a review of the new Triple H DVD, Thy Kingdom Come, which was released only a few weeks ago, a 2-disc DVD set. The Blu-ray edition has a whole bunch of extras on it. There is a documentary on this DVD, sit-down interview with Triple H, lots of clips from the very beginning of his career right up until his time now as the COO of World Wrestling Entertainment. Documentary runtime goes a little over 2 hours. I think I clocked it at about 2 hours and 6 minutes or so. There's a bunch of extra matches on Disc 1. Disc 2 has even more matches. And as I mentioned before, the Blu-ray edition of this DVD has about 90 minutes of extras, including a bonus match. So we're going to get to all of that stuff. What I want to do here is just give some thoughts primarily on the documentary portion of the DVD. And then what we'll do is we'll just get into a breakdown of all the different matches, how the match listing stacks up to other DVD releases, and some of the matches that Triple H has had over the course of his career. He's had a lot of great ones and some not so great ones. So how does this track listing on this particular DVD stack up? First, I lost track of how many times the phrase "the business" was used throughout this DVD, throughout the documentary. Whatever you do, please do not turn it into a drinking game, because there's no way you'll survive beyond the first hour of the documentary. They'll have you zipped up in a body bag before the DVD ever hits the Blu-ray extra, so just do yourself that favor. Story starts right at the very beginning, getting into wrestling, becoming a big fan, meeting Ted Arcidi at his local gym. Arcidi helped not only with Triple H's training, but he helped get him in the door to train with Killer Kowalski, which is the school where Triple H really cut his teeth. Arcidi is known for being the first man in history to bench press over 700 pounds. He was just a monstrous man. He wrestled briefly in the 80s in the WWF, but didn't last very long, so that's the story on Arcidi. But he helped Triple H get his foot in the door, which is not something I knew previous to this. There's footage of Triple H's first indie match as Terra Rising in November of 1992. So, there he is coming out for his very first match in what appeared to be a high school gymnasium somewhere. Really, really rare stuff. They really did dig out some stuff here that I think you'll, whether you're a Triple H fan or not, I think you'll be pretty impressed by some of the stuff that they've got on here. He tells a funny story about Walter, Kowalski as he calls him. And, Kowalski gave him the name of the Terrorizer. Originally, that was going to be his name. Triple H was not at all enamored with this name. He just thought it was kind of, cliched, and he was hoping to have two names like a normal person, like a first name, last name, and Kowalski decided to make him Terra Rising, meaning Terra is his first name, Rising is his last name, and it's kind of a funny story, but that's how he got the original name. The Eric Bischoff WCW story that he tells on here, I know they posted this as a free kind of like a preview video on WWE.com, so many of you who have not yet bought the DVD may have already seen this, but I thought it was one of the more interesting stories he tells on the DVD. I knew he worked in WCW as Jean-Paul Levesque. I believe the only pay-per-view match he ever had was a Starrcade match against Alex Wright in 1994, I believe that would have been. But he tells the story of a conversation that he had with Eric Bischoff. Bischoff was very impressed by him. And they spoke on the phone, and Bischoff said, "I'd like to offer you a 2-year deal to stay with WCW, $52,000 a year." And Triple H said, "Listen, can I just do 1 year instead of 2?" And Bischoff was kind of taken aback by that. I mean, I'm giving you a contract for 2 years here, guaranteed. You only want 1? That doesn't really make a lot of sense. And Triple H says, "Yeah, the thing is, it's $52,000, which means I'm going to starve for a year." Now, $52,000 back then, or even now, even to somebody like me, I wouldn't say you're going to starve, but I guess you got to look at it from a wrestler's perspective. If they're on the road, they're responsible for a lot of those road expenses. It really isn't that much money. So he said, "Listen, I know I'm going to starve, and basically, at the end of that first year, you're going to know either I'm not worth $52,000 or I'm worth a whole hell of a lot more than $52,000. It ain't going to take more than a year to figure that out." So Bischoff said, okay, and they agreed to do a year. And as Triple H says on the DVD, it's one of those things that when he thinks back to that conversation, he can't believe that he actually had the balls to say it. But there you go. He said, listen, you're going to know pretty quickly if I'm good or not. And he believed in himself enough to know that at the end of that year, he was going to get himself a sweeter deal. So things worked out a little bit differently for him in terms of the career path he took. But it certainly did take a lot of balls on his part to speak to Bischoff that way and basically tell him to knock a year off the deal. He talks about Ric Flair, his idol, at the time, having booking power in WCW, being all excited and telling him that they've decided they're going to turn him into a Frenchman. They want him to take his character in a slightly different direction. He's going to come out with this French accent, thumbing his nose at the American wrestling fans. There's funny footage on there of him using a French accent that is only slightly better than the Swiss accent that I once used on my Sound Off podcast. That was the interesting stuff that I found on the WCW portion. From there, obviously, he takes a deal with Vince McMahon after meeting with him face-to-face up in Connecticut. Goes to WWF with the Hunter Hearst Helmsley gimmick, which is not really all that different from the Jean-Paul Levesque gimmick he was doing, aside from him dropping the French accent. He became a Greenwich blue blood snob. But it was more or less the same character. If you really look at him from a physical standpoint and just the way the character was portrayed, it wasn't like they brought him up to New York, as they used to say, and gave him some completely off-the-wall, ridiculous gimmick. And to that effect, that leads me to The Undertaker. The Undertaker is one of the many people featured on this DVD out of character, talking about Triple H, talking about his career. In fact, Undertaker is on there wearing a hoodie for some reason. And he repeatedly said throughout the DVD at various points, whenever he had a chance to say it, that he thought the blue blood gimmick he had when he first came in was a bunch of crap. He made comments here and there about how Triple H had to overcome a crappy gimmick. And it was a wrestling gimmick, not unlike other wrestling gimmicks at the time. I didn't really think it was all that bad. If you compare Triple H's gimmick when he first came into WWF to a lot of the other characters they had on television around that same time in 1995 and 1996, and I've talked about this on my podcast before. I mean, there were some horrendous characters that they had on their television shows. They had from Mantar to Aldo Montoya and T.L. Hopper, the wrestling plumber, to the Goon, to an evil dentist, and everything in between. The guy came in, he was a bit of a snob. He dressed not particularly manly, I guess you would say. But aside from that, what was really so bad about the gimmick? I think he got off easy compared to some of those other guys. But Undertaker said it was a crappy gimmick, so it must be a crappy gimmick. They had comments as well on the DVD from The Rock. They had a little bit of Brock Lesnar, not too much. It looked, based on the shirt he was wearing, it looked like they may have taped those comments right when Brock first came back into the company. Maybe in the arena, in fact, the night he came back. They might have just sat him down and said, listen, let's just get some stock footage of you talking about a whole bunch of different people, including Triple H. So his comments on there are relatively brief. They have new comments from Dave Bautista, who I guess they flew into Connecticut to shoot some commentary for this. And he talked mostly about Triple H's work ethic and how much he learned from traveling with him on the road. I always wonder, how much traveling did he and the Evolution guys really do with Triple H on the road during that time? I'm sure Triple H and Flair were probably together quite a bit, but I just wonder, because even at that point, I think he was probably flying on the jet with Stephanie. So was it a situation where, Orton and Batista were with them on the jet? I have a lot of difficulty in my head, at that point in Triple H's career, like 2003, 2004, 2005, him in a rental car or something riding down the road with Dave Bautista. Batista speaks glowingly of Triple H, as he should, because Triple H put him over in 2005, like $1 million, 3 straight pay-per-views. He put Batista over and made him a star. So it was good to see Big Dave make an appearance on the DVD. Terry Taylor is the person on this release who gets the award for the biggest suck-up. I thought he just came across as a gigantic kiss-ass. Apparently he and Triple H have a relationship that goes back many years to the WCW days, and they're friends, and it's not that I expect him to say bad things about Triple H, but he kind of filled the role that I would say that the Brooklyn Brawler or The Miz has filled on other people's DVDs, where you just listen to them and some of the comments and it's like, oh my God, just shut up already. it's like, oh my God, to have a wife and 3 kids and a job and blah, 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 blah. It's like, yeah, Triple H is not the only guy to have a wife and 3 kids or 4 kids and a high-pressure job. So that's how Terry Taylor just came across to me in a lot of his comments on this DVD. Triple H acknowledges the professional tension between him and The Rock when both of them were on top in 2000 and around that time period, which was cool to at least, acknowledge that, because you would read stories all the time about, there being a professional jealousy between them, more so from Triple H's side than from The Rock's side. The Rock, went on to make movies and become a big star. And, I've always had this impression that maybe not so much now, but certainly back then when the two of them were fighting for that top spot, and maybe Triple H felt, he was there first, and, The Rock, because The Rock didn't debut in that company until almost a year and a half, I think, after Triple H did. And, had the rocket strapped to him pretty early on. He didn't become a main eventer overnight, but he was within 2 years of making his debut. And I could see where that maybe would lend itself to some bad feelings between the two of them, or bad feelings from Triple H. I mean, I remember when Shawn Michaels joined the NWO in 2002. And in fact, it might have been the night where they kicked Booker T out of the group. Shawn Michaels super kicked Booker T right in the face and cut a promo on him and all the things that were wrong with Booker T. And I think he made a comment in there about him, stealing Hunter's thunder just like The Rock or something like that. And I just remember at that time thinking, what a random, stupid comment, to make, because what does The Rock have to do with what's going on screen at that time? The Rock, I don't even think was on television at that point, or he was just about to make his comeback. He was off filming a movie somewhere, and here's Shawn Michaels, making this comment. And he just comes off all butthurt when he does it, like, he's sticking up for Triple H, like, oh, The Rock is always stealing his thunder. And to me, it always validated those stories, because you read stories online, and, some of it's bullshit, and a lot of it is true. And sometimes it can be hard to parse the fact from fiction and all that. But then, you see his best buddy on TV making a stupid comment like that, and it's like, yeah, I could see it. I could see where these guys are completely insecure. So he did acknowledge that. They talked quite a bit about how Triple H put his career in jeopardy, basically. Undertaker is on this DVD talking about how he had he's heart-to-heart talks with Triple H about just ignore what other people think. As long as you love her and as long as you just, keep your head down, do your own thing. Basically, screw all the haters and all that stuff. And it's true. I mean, here's a guy who ended up in a relationship with the boss's daughter. And so he had to know from that moment on there was going to be this perception of him that was not going to be favorable, that he was going to win his matches and win championships and be a top guy only because he was dating or marrying whatever the boss's daughter. That was something that Triple H was always going to have to deal with, rightly or wrongly, however you may feel about it. And it was interesting to hear different people, including The Undertaker, talk about that and talk about how at that time that was something that he was worried about. And Triple H himself says, yeah, you're damn right I'm worried about that. That I didn't think, oh, what if this doesn't work out? I'm going to be out of a job. I'm sure there probably was a lot of pressure on him at the time. I don't think he was like some evil villain sitting in his chair stroking his cat going, yes, it's part of my master plan. I will one day own this company, and that's the only reason he married Stephanie. They got put in a program together. They were working closely with each other, and that's what happens sometimes. They have comments from Linda McMahon, nothing from Shane. So you have comments from Vince, comments from Linda, Stephanie herself, Triple H, nothing from Shane at all on this DVD. But like Linda McMahon is on there talking about, at first I didn't feel comfortable. There was this rule about not, dating the talent. And, at first Vince McMahon gave them their blessing and they were dating, but then Vince took it away and all of this stuff. I mean, if you're bored by that stuff, then you're not going to like it because they do spend a decent amount of time. I found it interesting just because, these are the two people that one day are going to be running this company. They are going to be legit, the power couple in pro wrestling. And I thought it was at least interesting to find out about some of the, the backstage stuff going on at the time and a lot of his real concern that, shit, I worked so hard to become a top guy and to get to where I am. And if this doesn't work out, and, let's face it, a lot of relationships don't last. A lot of marriages end in divorce, unfortunately, these days. I'm fucked if that happens. And, I'm sure it's something that he probably still worries about in the back of his mind. They talked about bringing back Degeneration X in 2006, having to keep it cleaner than they did back in the day, with Shawn's religious beliefs and the PG direction. Although, DX didn't really return in the PG era per se, because PG didn't arrive until 2008. So when they did the DX stuff in 06 and 07, they were still kind of, it could be raunchy and push the envelope a little bit. It wasn't until the year after that, actually, that they went full-on PG. And DX was never really going to be what it used to be. But to a younger audience, those people don't know. There's a lot of kids who grew up and they think that DX from 06, 07 is the greatest thing in the world, and have no concept of the original DX, which was a completely different beast. DX was funny back in the day, the Nation skit and a lot of the juvenile stuff they did, but they also had a serious side to them. The DX from 07 was pure comedy. That's really all it was. It was meant to be a comedic act and nothing more. So I think that's the big difference. In the WWE in the late 90s, it was like gang warfare. You had factions everywhere. DX, the Nation, the Bariquas, the Truth Commission, DOA, I'm sure I'm missing a few other ones, the Job Squad, whatever. And like I said, it was a pack of guys that ran together, and they would do a lot of juvenile, stupid shit, but they also functioned as a unit, right? And they fought together and all that stuff. Triple H and Shawn, it was just a tag team, basically. They called it DX, so they sold a whole bunch of merchandise and T-shirts and all that stuff. They would come out, and they would basically talk about how funny it was that they were still doing DX, even though they were both 40 years old. And they would make fun of Shawn Michaels' thinning hairline. So that was the big difference between DX, I think, in the late 90s and the DX we saw about 6-7 years ago. I thought there was shockingly little on this DVD of Triple H's reign of terror, as I call it, from 2002 to 2004. And I know people will disagree with me. Oh, you're a Triple H hater. Triple H was the best heel in wrestling. He was old school, blah, blah, blah. Fine. Maybe that's what he was going for. I thought it was one of the most boring periods in the history of Monday Night Raw. And they had the brand split. SmackDown at least had some good stuff at that point. SmackDown's best stuff actually came in 2003. That's when SmackDown was at its best. He wrestled so many guys who did not come out of their feuds with Triple H looking good at all. And I always found that funny because Triple H talks about how Ric Flair is his idol, right? He grew up a huge fan of Ric Flair. You go back and look at pictures like on this DVD of Triple H when he first broke in under Killer Kowalski. He had bleached blonde hair. He was like a Ric Flair clone. He clearly was modeling himself after Flair. And he respects him, worked with him in WWE, part of Evolution, all that stuff. Ric Flair, when he was the heavyweight champion back in the mid-'80s and the late 80s, he was notorious for going out of his way to make his opponents look good and put them over. And by putting them over, I don't mean that Flair lost to everybody. I'm not saying Triple H should have lost to everybody he faced, that, RVD and Kane and Booker T and Scott Steiner all should have beaten him. I'm not saying that. But there was a pattern in that period where they would put guys up against him, he would knock him down, and just do the exact opposite of what Ric Flair used to do. Ric Flair would talk up his opponents. He would talk about what made his opponents so great, so that, going into those matches, people actually bought into the fact that, hey, this guy could beat Ric Flair. And Flair would, bump around for everybody and do all that stuff. And guys, even if they lost or didn't win the title anyway, would not come out basically dead, which a lot of guys did coming out of their feud with Triple H. And that's where this whole notion of, Triple H buries guys. Well, there were guys that got buried coming out of their feuds with Triple H, whether that was something he intended to do or not. And I just was bored to tears by a good chunk of his reign there from 02 to 04. It wasn't all bad, but it was mostly bad. It was one of my least favorite periods in Raw history. But I was very surprised. They never really dove into this. Since he was the focal point of the show for so long, they positioned him as this, top guy, this greatest world champion of all time, Triple H. And I thought there was just shockingly little on it in this documentary. It would have been amusing to get his thoughts, for example, on the Katie Vick stuff, as far as looking back on it. That was one of the more notorious things he was involved in during that period. He's talked about the Katie Vick stuff in radio interviews, and he's actually pretty funny when he talks about it. I think he realizes how unbelievably stupid it was. And, he would talk about how Vince McMahon would basically, produce the segments and how Vince was really into it. And Triple H can poke fun at it, but they didn't really get into it at all on the DVD. So I wish they would have let him do that. He talks about the WrestleMania 25 match against Randy Orton and goes into detail about it, speaks about being upstaged by The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels earlier in the show, which in my opinion is the greatest WrestleMania match of all time, that first one between Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. There was absolutely nothing on that show that could possibly follow that match. Anything that followed that match was dead on arrival. And a similar thing happened years earlier, WrestleMania 18, with Triple H and Chris Jericho getting upstaged by The Rock and Hulk Hogan earlier in the show. So he admits that the match he had with Orton wasn't what he hoped it would be. They had a rough time getting the fans amped up for it. They were all drained by that Michaels-Undertaker match. And he makes an interesting point about how it was such an intensely personal angle between the two of them, with Orton punting his father-in-law, RKOing his wife, kissing her on the lips, and then Triple H invaded Orton's house and threw him through the front window. They tried to make it this big personal issue where Triple H just could not wait to get his hands on Randy Orton. It should have been this no-holds-barred fight. And instead, they had a stipulation where if Triple H got disqualified or counted out, he would lose the WWE Championship, which severely limited what they were able to do during the match. It handicapped them. So Triple H felt that it really hurt the match. Orton, on the DVD, says he still thought they had a good match. It's like it didn't bother him. We still had a good match. I headlined WrestleMania. That's all that matters. But it was nice to see Triple H acknowledge that the match was a bit of a clunker. It really was not that good of a match. He says he was offered and turned down a 3-picture movie deal with New Line Cinema after he filmed the Blade Trinity movie many years ago. He turned it down because it just wasn't something he wanted to do. And I have to say, one negative on the DVD as well is the time they spend showing footage of him on set for The Chaperone and Inside Out, those 2 WWE films. They didn't spend too long on them, but it was still longer than they should have. I know they were trying to drive home the point that he made about how doing movies just wasn't something he wanted to do, when the opportunities first presented themselves, because, he's a guy who eats wrestling, he sleeps it, he breathes it 24/7. But you know what? Show some clips from the set and just move on. If they did a Rock DVD, for example, and spent 10 minutes on movie footage, I could accept that because that became such a huge part of The Rock's career. It's what he does full time now. He's a big movie star. Being in movies is not a big part of Triple H's career. He's not a master thespian. Triple H is not known for his great acting career. So that really should not have been part of this documentary. There was nothing negative at all in the documentary about Chyna. He talks about discovering her, having to pitch her repeatedly to Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon was not sold on the idea of this woman coming in. And he and Shawn Michaels just repeatedly went back to Vince. They went back to him and kept on him until he finally acquiesced and said, fine, this is on you. If this doesn't work out, this is on you guys. And obviously it worked out. She became a big part of his act. And I think a big part of why Triple H got over the way he did as a singles guy in 97, 98. People would say the same thing about Randy Savage and Elizabeth. And I don't know that I necessarily buy into that completely. I think even without Elizabeth, Savage would have been a big star. But would he have been the level of star that he was? I don't know. That's an interesting question. I mean, Elizabeth didn't do much when she was out there. She just stood there. She was eye candy. She was this sweet, innocent-looking woman. But she played a very important role in that package. It was always the Macho Man and Miss Elizabeth. And I think in a lot of ways, Triple H and Chyna kind of mirrors that, in that, Chyna would do more physically at ringside than Elizabeth ever did, but they both played very important roles, I think, in each of their individual careers. So anyway, all positive about Chyna. They don't address the relationship he had with her because they dated for quite some time. It never comes up, not even once, or how it ended, when he hooked up with Stephanie. And my take on it is this. I understand why it didn't make the cut on here, but you want to do a documentary that's, inside and talks about a lot of the backstage stuff like they do on this thing, then you need to touch on stuff like this. It's one thing to focus on all the positive stuff and the odds that Triple H had to overcome because, between the curtain call at MSG, which they get into, and the injuries to get to where he is today. But you can't just give us the good stuff without the bad stuff. You can't just paint him in a shining light like he's the wrestling Jesus without dwelling on some of the negative stuff, which obviously they didn't do on this DVD. So how inside do you really want to be? They only want to be inside with this stuff when it suits their needs, and that's a problem that I had with this DVD. And this also isn't addressed on the DVD, and I didn't expect it to be. I'm not saying it even should have, but the reason a lot of people have had issues with Triple H, and there's a lot of Triple H hate out there, is because there was a time when the perception was that he didn't, put certain people over who perhaps he should have, or that he did only because he was forced to do so, by Vince McMahon or something. So they're doing this what's best for business shtick on TV right now. That's the storyline he's involved in as the COO. But they want you to think in watching this DVD that that's all he ever cared about in real life. He's always been about what's best for business, not necessarily what's best for Triple H. And I don't think this DVD is going to really do much to change those people's minds on that. He looked out for his spot like a lot of guys have. He's hardly the only one. He may have been in a better position to do it once he hooked up with Stephanie and had, and even before he hooked up with Stephanie. He was sitting in, and Stephanie talks about it on here. He was sitting in on production meetings long before he ever got involved with her in storyline and then in real life. She talked about how, I would see him in production meetings and I would blush. The story that Kurt Angle has also told in interviews before. Right before he won the WWF title for the first time. How Triple H was sitting in on a meeting where they were basically talking about the title change. Rock was going to drop the belt to Kurt and not, Triple H or anybody else. And Triple H spoke up. He didn't think that was the right move to make, because he thought that Angle was too small to be believable as the champion. And here's Triple H, who has nothing at all to do with this other guy, interfering with another man's push, another man's career. What business is it of his to do something like that? To sabotage this poor guy? And then Jerry Briscoe actually tells Triple H, well, why don't you and Kurt have a shoot fight and then tell me how much him being small is a detriment? And Triple H kept his mouth shut after that, and Angle ended up winning the championship. But it's stories like that one that make, you question this notion that, Triple H has always been such a swell guy who does what's good for business and not himself. I don't know how true that really is, and if you are one of these people who is not a fan of Triple H because of that, because of the stories, this DVD will do absolutely nothing to change your mind. Nothing may change your mind. There may be nothing that he could say or that he could do to ever change those people's minds. So I wouldn't necessarily go into the DVD expecting him to address all of that stuff because he doesn't. To his credit, when he wanted to, he put guys over big time. I mentioned Batista earlier, WrestleMania 21. He did it for 3 straight pay-per-views. He tapped to Benoit, Mania 20, Batista 21, he got beat. Cena tapped him out at 22. He lost in a triple threat match at WrestleMania 24, and then beat Orton at 25. So there was this stretch of WrestleManias there where he didn't win a match, almost 5 years, actually. I'm guessing he probably would have gotten his win back over Cena at WrestleMania 23 if he didn't get hurt, but we'll never know. But, he should be commended, I think, for busting his ass to get to where he is. And not just because he slept around with Stephanie, for living a clean life, which they address on the DVD. Kevin Nash is interviewed. There's some fresh material with him, and he says, he brought Triple H into the clique largely because he could be their designated driver. He didn't drink booze or take pills. And for the majority of his career, he stayed out of trouble, unlike other guys. I can't ever think of a story involving Triple H, doing something, getting into like a drunken stupor or DUI or, physically fighting with people in the back and causing trouble. He may have caused trouble in other ways, in more subtle ways, but, I think he should be commended for that. I think that he does deserve credit for that. And he also needs to be commended for the work that he's done and continues to do with the developmental system. They just unveiled this new performance center, which he spearheaded. That whole thing was his idea. He pushed for it. There was a long time where, WWE was pumping hardly any money into their developmental system. You could tell just by, look at the talent. Look at the talent they churned out in the early 2000s when they had the relationship going with OVW. And look at the number of talent they churned out in the late 2000s. and compare the two. Look at all those stars from the early 2000s. The Bautista, Cena, Lesnar, Shelton Benjamin. I know there's a whole ton of guys I'm forgetting. If you ask me to name, 3 people or 5 people from the late 2000s, like real big talented guys who came through that system and now are at the top of the food chain, I can't really think of any. I mean, CM Punk came through the system later on, but Punk was already great by the time he went to Developmental. They didn't make CM Punk. CM Punk made himself on the indie scene. So finally, it looks like, they finally are giving the attention that they need to be giving to the developmental stuff. They're pumping a lot of money into it. It cost them millions of dollars to build that building. And I think he's doing great stuff. I love NXT. I watch NXT every week. It's an easy watch. I love seeing, the development of all the new characters and everything. And that's all him. He's hands-on. I don't even know if Vince McMahon has even been inside the Performance Center yet. I want to talk about the DVD match listing here. The good thing about it, there are few, if any, repeats from other sets. That's a common complaint among people when it comes to WWE DVDs. You'll have so many matches that appear on so many different DVDs. It's like, oh, I already saw that match. Why would I pay for a set made up of, half the matches are already on DVDs that I've bought? You can't say that about the Triple H one. That's the good news. On the other hand, I can't say that I'm completely enamored with all of the match choices on here. There have to be other matches they could have put on here other than some of the ones they included. This is not the strongest list of matches. This is not a collection of Triple H's greatest matches. Some of them maybe were not released before, so they're kind of rare, but let me just give a quick rundown of them. They have Jean-Paul Levesque against Ricky Steamboat. So a rare match from WCW with Triple H against Steamboat back when Triple H was first really getting started in the wrestling business. And he looked strong. He lost to Steamboat in this match, but he looked really strong in this match. You could tell that they saw something in him as more than just an enhancement guy in WCW. But really, how far would he have gone? How far would he have gone there with Hulk Hogan and the like running the show at the time? Probably not very far. So for his career, I think it's safe to say he made the right choice. So that match is from a WCW Saturday Night taping back in '94. It's a pretty good match. They have a match with him against Dude Love from that one night only UK pay-per-view in 1997. This was maybe the worst match I've ever seen the two of them have. It's not a horrible match, but I would say it's a horribly dull match. I've seen the two of them have much better matches. And by the way, I forgot to mention on the documentary, Triple H goes out of his way to mention that Mick Foley helped put him on the map. And that's interesting because, you don't hear Triple H very often say positive things about Mick Foley's influence on his career. Some of the comments he's made in interviews before actually goes completely counter to that. It's almost like he resents Foley for some reason. I can never understand why he took that attitude. He comes off a lot as being very unappreciative for what Foley did for him. And maybe he buys into the whole thing. You remember Ric Flair in his book called Foley a Glorified Stuntman? Maybe he bought into that. And maybe you feel the same way too about Mick Foley. There's people who would say that, yeah, he just took big bumps. He was a stunt guy. He wasn't a wrestler. I think that's a crock of crap, but you're entitled to your opinion. But on this DVD, he specifically says, Mick helped put me on the map. And I thought that was really cool because Mick Foley did help put Triple H on the map. Would Triple H have become a top star without him? Yeah, probably. But it would have taken a lot longer. And it was very important, those matches that he had with Triple H at the beginning of 2000 when Triple H was the WWF champion. Austin was gone, so Triple H and Rock were going to have to carry the company for that year. And he went into the Royal Rumble. He had that street fight with Foley at Madison Square Garden, an awesome match, one of the best matches all year. And that really put Triple H, to me, as a fan, over the hump as a believable main eventer. When that was over, I thought to myself, okay, now I can buy this guy as a main event player. He did, it wasn't a lot of great wrestling in the match, but it was a fight. It was a brawl. And he hung in there. He hung in there, on Foley's turf, and he came out looking real tough, a lot tougher than he ever did before. And then they followed that up with the Hell in a Cell match the next month. And I enjoyed many of the matches he had with Foley. This one, though, against Dude Love in the UK, not so much. It has the 60-minute Iron Man match from Judgment Day 2000, Triple H against The Rock. I thought this was, if not the best, one of the best Iron Man matches in WWE history. I just think it's a great match. These two guys were at their peak at that point. They were carrying the company on their back. The product was hot, so obviously the crowd was into a lot of things that they maybe in today's day and age would not be into. Wrestling was just a lot hotter then than it is now. So the people were going crazy, though, for these guys. And what I loved about this match is that it was all action. I can't watch this match and say, God, this match was boring. Whereas with the Bret-Shawn Iron Man match at WrestleMania 12, there were plenty of points where I watched that match and felt, this is a boring match. You don't think that watching Triple H and The Rock in the Iron Man match. I thought this was a great choice. It's, like I said, all action. These two guys at their peak, in their prime. And it's the full 60 minutes. It's a great match. It's awesome that they included it. There's a no disqualification match with Triple H against Kurt Angle from Unforgiven 2000. Pretty good match. Really sad that they ended this love triangle storyline with Kurt, Triple H, and Stephanie when they did. This was pretty much the blow-off to what I thought was an awesome storyline at the time. I don't quite know why this was blown off in this way. It was just very abrupt. It just, even then, I remember feeling, that's it? You know, like there should have been more to it than that. Kurt was okay, because Kurt won the WWF title a month later. I just wish they would have dragged that storyline out a little bit more, because it was very entertaining. But this is a very good match. They have the two-man power trip, Austin, Triple H against Undertaker and Kane, all titles on the line at Backlash 01. It was a good match, but again, I don't know that this necessarily had to be on this DVD. There's nothing about it that's overly outstanding. I think it's just four big stars with all the belts on the line, and it was a good match. World Championship match from Monday Night Raw in June of 2003 has included Triple H against Rob Van Dam. This is actually a very good match. One of those forgotten about little gems because it happened on, a random episode of Raw. Who's going to remember their match from June of 03? The match between Triple H and RVD most people remember is the match from the Unforgiven pay-per-view where RVD was supposed to win but didn't. But this is a match I think that's worthy of being on here. They have the Last Man Standing match from the 04 Rumble with Triple H and Shawn Michaels. That's the one that ended in a draw. That was a really good match. There's a Raw match from February of 06 against Ric Flair. I have no idea why this is on here. I didn't think this was a particularly good match. It's certainly nothing like the Raw match they had in Greensboro a few years before this, where Flair almost beat Triple H for the title. I didn't think this really had any place on here. It's just kind of a random match. Same thing with the match against Booker T. When Triple H came back from his second quad tear in 07, he did so against King Booker at SummerSlam. I didn't think this was much of a good match, but they put that on there. There's another Last Man Standing match from No Mercy 07 against Randy Orton. There's a SmackDown match from November of 2008 against Jeff Hardy that is actually pretty good. Again, not the best Triple H Jeff Hardy match I've ever seen. Maybe the other ones have already been on DVDs, and that's why they put this one on there. And there's a match against Chris Jericho as well from Raw in November of 09 that was also pretty good. So that's the match listing. Again, not the strongest collection of matches, but I could appreciate that they went out of their way to not include too many, if any, matches that have already been on other DVDs. I mean, maybe the Iron Man match was at some point. And I should say here that I did not see the Blu-ray version. That was not the version of the DVD that I watched. But there are about 90 minutes of extras, including stories about the original plan with him and Sherry Martel in WCW. I believe Sherry was supposed to manage him and William Regal as a tag team before he left for the WWF, so there's a story about that. I think the story most people would be interested in hearing about is the original plan for Evolution, which would have had Mark Jindrak in the role of Enforcer that eventually went to Dave Bautista. They even filmed a vignette with Jindrak, Triple H, Ric Flair, and Randy Orton. You can find the screenshot of it online. Jindrak had some success in WCW as part of a tag team with Sean O'Haire. He came over to WWE after they, picked the bones of WCW, and he was in line for the biggest push of his career, but they went with Big Dave instead, and Jindrak ended up, debuting on television anyway as a singles guy. Then he did some tag wrestling, and he didn't stick around very long after that. This isn't on the DVD, but Jindrak has commented on this before. He admitted that he really wasn't ready to be part of a group like Evolution. He was very immature. He knows he dropped the ball, but he's very happy with how things worked out for him. And now he's a big star down in Mexico. He wrestles there as Marco Corleone. He even has a soap opera he appears on that does something like 4 million viewers on television every night on Univision. So he's not doing too bad for himself these days. But Evolution would have looked very different with Jindrak in that role instead of Batista. There's a story on there about a rib that Triple H pulled once on Chris Jericho with a protein bar. I don't even want to know that story. There's a story about why he tapes his wrists before every match. There's a look at the different jobs that he has behind the scenes. So there's some interesting material on the Blu-ray version to supplement the documentary. They also have his match with Brock Lesnar from this year's WrestleMania on there as a Blu-ray exclusive. I was at that show live and was not a fan of that match. They didn't do those guys any favors by putting them out there after that Undertaker CM Punk match. This seems to be something of a trend with Triple H at WrestleMania. You know, the match with Jericho suffered by coming after Rock Hogan. The match with Orton suffered after coming after Michaels and Undertaker. And again here with Brock, it kind of suffered, I think, coming right after Undertaker Punk. You know, I thought it was a good brawl, but nothing special. I would have included his end of an era Hell in a Cell match with Undertaker from WrestleMania 28 over this one. I mean, that was a more dramatic match. And for all the talk on this DVD about the stuff with Undertaker, I'm surprised they didn't include any of their Mania matches. You would think they would include one, and I think that was the one they should have included, because they talked about, and he talked about how important that match was to him. I think that would have been the place to do it, even though he lost that match. And I mean, I guess he beat Brock, so maybe that's why they included that one instead. But, you know, so what? Go with the better match. Who cares if he won or lost? One last thing on the Blu-ray extras. One of my podcast listeners, David from the UK, who did watch all of the stories, he wrote in about something funny that he noticed. Triple H talks about the WrestleMania 28 Hell in a Cell match and how much that meant to him. So he had a commemorative plaque made special for Shawn Michaels, Undertaker, and himself. The only thing is, it has the wrong WrestleMania on it. Here's a screen cap of the plaque that David sent over. You see it says WrestleMania 27 in Roman numerals, when in fact it was WrestleMania 28 in Miami where that match took place. They did wrestle at WrestleMania 27, Undertaker and Triple H, but that's not where the end of an era match happened. So, oops. I don't know how many other people picked up on it, but David did, so thanks for sending that in. So the final word on Thy Kingdom Come, Triple H, the official DVD. I recommend picking it up. I think it's a really good documentary, but by no means the best that I've seen from them. I thought the CM Punk documentary was far more interesting. That's probably still the best superstar documentary they've ever put together. The Jake Roberts Pick Your Poison one is another I would recommend, and I like that one better than this one. This one isn't up there with those, but it's still worth watching. For the rare footage they have on there from him coming up out of Kowalski School and in WCW, and the backstage clips. Like, there's one with him, Shawn, and Undertaker from WrestleMania 28 after the match. They're all, it's just an embrace and a standing ovation from the guys in the back. It's not like there's some secret conversation that we're able to eavesdrop on, but it's still a very cool moment to see. I think if you're a Triple H fan, this DVD is a must-have. You're going to love it. If you're not a Triple H fan, it's still worth the watch, but I don't think it's going to change your mind about the guy at all. I did gain a newfound appreciation for how he got into wrestling, his passion for it, and how much he believed in himself. You could just tell that conversation with Bischoff, and he believed that he could be a top star one day. And you have to believe in yourself, because if you don't, then why would anybody else? And I think that message comes across in this DVD, and I got a lot of respect for the guy because of that. So I would definitely recommend this. Just don't go in with your expectations sky high. It's not, the best documentary in the world, but it's very good, and I think it's worth a watch. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know. Leave some comments and likes and all that good stuff here on YouTube, and you can subscribe to this very channel. I post these Sound Off extra episodes when I can. There's no set schedule. There could be a book, there could be a DVD, maybe a pay-per-view wrap-up the day after. There's no telling when or what may be posted here, so subscribe, and when new videos go up, you will be informed of such. And check out our full podcast as well. The Solomonster Sounds Off, as I said earlier, posted every Sunday on the Solomonster.com, Stitcher Radio, and in iTunes. You can subscribe to us there as well. Please follow me on Twitter, @Solomonster. And until next time, be well, stay safe. We'll be back up with a new video very soon, and the latest Sound Off podcast this weekend. Take care, guys.